Anyone's ever used the league purposely as a stepping stone to public office, but some have, in fact. And, I got into the league through Carolyn Allen, still the greatest mayor the city's ever had. Anyway, okay. There are three items, handouts on your table. Maria Cortez Perez may refer to them more later, but we've got a one-page item handout about tuition equity, our subject today. You've got a list of local agencies and resources that provide direct services to the immigration, refugee, asylum community. Our roundtable, we don't provide those direct services. We are a clearinghouse or a support system for those agencies and resources. And also a flyer about the Church World Service Immigrant Solidarity Fund. The Community Foundation of Greensboro has a fund where people can donate funds that go towards immigrant services, but this is more of a grassroots effort, shall we say. So check that out as you can. One quick but sad note, B.J. Weatherby, who is a long-time stalwart for the League of Women Voters, the Piedmont Triad, passed away a few days ago. And the obituary was not in the print edition that I saw, but she had various positions on our board, and her obituary includes the recommendation that people join the League of Women Voters. And there'll be a celebration of her life, but December 9th, I think, is, so there's time. We'll get more information about that. Also, I want to mention that I don't know if she's able to join us. I don't see. Jody Stanley is a member of our Immigration Roundtable. She is the International Support Coordinator for the City of Greensboro, but she has been appointed to the Governor's Advisory Council on Hispanic and Latino Affairs, which is really great. And the chair of that group is Representative Hurtado. So you'll hear from him in a little while. All right, so I'm going to paint a little bit of the bigger picture before we get to our speakers who give you more particulars. We have a lot of employers in the Triad who are in great need of good employees. We have a lot of significantly sized companies coming into the Triad, so that need for qualified employees is only going to grow. On top of that, college enrollments are down, graduation rates are down. So we have this need for motivated, resourceful students, but we have this obstacle that we place in front of the pool of students who has often provided the great energy and growth in the labor pool, which is immigrants and refugees. So we're here to talk about that obstacle today. So there is, the history of the United States is this is where the growth in the economy in general comes from, immigrants and refugees, but especially this pool of motivated, resourceful, resilient students coming, going into college, coming out of college. To put obstacles in front of these people is not only unfair, but bad economics. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, or maybe shooting ourselves in the brain would be a better way of putting it, if we deny these qualified students the opportunity to go to college and earn their degrees. And you're going to hear from 3 students today who have persevered and are on their path despite those obstacles. So also, and just it's in your sheet, but the basic policy, out-of-state tuition, which is required for undocumented students, can be 3 or 4 times in-state tuition. So it's not a small difference. There are, I think, more than 20 states that now have some path for immigrants and refugees and asylees to get in-state tuition, but I think Representative Hurtado will address that. So before I stop, I guess I just want to say something about this political moment that we're in, where some elected officials are feeding this anti-immigrant sentiment across the country. In some ways, and it's not the only area in which our country seems to perhaps have taken a step backward. We think that our efforts, hearing from these people who are on the front lines, fighting the good fight, is important, never been more important than for us to do. And an example of that, I think, UB Sandoval, one of our speakers, we're going to ignore, but a federal judge in Texas has basically trying to outlaw DACA, which is deferred action for childhood arrivals that passed under the Obama administration. So that it remains in place, but it is a contested area. So that's just one example. Okay. Gerrymandering is an issue that the League of Women Voters has worked hard on for a number of years. Our first speaker, Ricky Hurtado, was gerrymandered out of his seat in the legislature last November. He was the only Hispanic member of our General Assembly. Now we have 0. All right. Representative Hurtado, he represented House District 63, and Ricky is the son of working-class immigrants. He grew up in rural North Carolina. He's the product of North Carolina public schools. He attended UNC Chapel Hill, and there's too long a list to tell you all the things that he's done. He's the co-founder of Latinx ED, a statewide organization. He is the chair, as I said, of the Governor's Advisory Council on Hispanic and Latino Affairs. He resides in Alamance County, and there's a long list of the Alamance organizations and nonprofits that he has worked with and continues to work with. So we're very appreciative to have Representative Hurtado with us.
So much, Gary, for that kind introduction. You reading that list made me realize I'm quite a busy man, so I hope you forgive me for my slow response on emails. Now maybe you understand, right? But it's good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be here this afternoon with the League. This is not our first encounter, and I'm sure it will not be our last. How many of you are familiar with the issue of in-state tuition here in North Carolina? Sounds like most hands are going up, right? And that is not a shocker, because you were one of the many groups that came to my office when I was in the legislature to lobby for tuition equity efforts. And so I know that it is an issue that's near and dear to my heart and near and dear to many of you, of your hearts. And I'm grateful for all the work, not just on this issue, but all of the issues that you all work on behalf of the people of North Carolina. I want to share a little bit of history to this issue, both personally and in North Carolina. Some of you may not realize this, but it was the issue of in-state tuition that opened my eyes to the state of North Carolina politics. In 2015 or so, I made my first formal trip to lobby at the North Carolina General Assembly. And that was the only seed I needed to be planted to realize that until we change who represents us in Raleigh, in the House and the Senate, we're going to continue to see similar outcomes for our DACA youth, for our public schools, for opportunity for everyone in North Carolina. And so on that day, whether it was subliminally or not, I made a decision that I would play a role in the General Assembly. I did not realize I'd be running a few years later, but that is the way life works, right? I, of course, was joined by many advocates and activists from across the state on that fateful day in the General Assembly, and I cannot take credit by being one of the first waves, right? I was probably like the 10th or 11th wave of activists that had gone to the General Assembly to talk about tuition equity in North Carolina, you can begin to trace back the advocacy on this issue back to the early 2000s when groups like El Pueblo, based out of Raleigh, statewide advocacy organization, really began to raise this issue and bring it to light. Those were the early days of immigration advocacy here in North Carolina, and organizations like that were receiving death threats. They were receiving very aggressive notices to sort of quiet down, right? And so that is the beginning of advocacy around that issue. And at the time, between I'd say 2005 and 2015, it wasn't actually that difficult to get members from both sides of the aisle to sponsor a bill to recognize the need for in-state tuition in North Carolina. You'd usually get a moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat to come together and propose a solution forward. And so pretty consistently, you could get members from both sides of the aisle to support this sort of legislation. Passing it is a whole another beast, as I've learned, but you could at least get it introduced, right? Slowly but surely, you began to see in North Carolina the rights of immigrant families taken away bit by bit. So a little later after this was like late 2000, like around 2007, 2008, I believe, driver's license for immigrants in North Carolina that were undocumented were taken away, and which really had a huge detrimental impact to immigrant families across North Carolina. And to this day, still the #1 issue priority area that many immigrant families cite when they ask about, well, can we change the laws in North Carolina? All they want is a driver's license to be able to drive freely and safely in North Carolina's roads. And so I share all that to sort of share how the tides have shifted over the last 20 years on this issue. You begin to see back whenever I was starting to advocate around this issue, the tides really turn, and there's not a lot of surprise or guess as to why that was, right? I think we can all sort of mark the 2016 election as a turning point in this nation's narrative and conversation around immigration in particular. And so that moment for this topic in North Carolina really began to shift, where you began to see bills being introduced in the General Assembly for in-state tuition, but only members of one party being on that list of sponsors. And I remember having a conversation with one of my colleagues. I was so eager, I was finally there in the General Assembly, right? I wanted to talk to the folks that had been writing, and more importantly, not writing these bills for so long, and asking them why, right? Like, some of you were on these bills beforehand, and now some of you are not. What has changed? And their answer was pretty straightforward. They're like, well, Trump changed, right? When you think about what members of both parties can and cannot do now is largely dictated by the national conversation around immigration. So Gary certainly alluded to it, right? Like, we cannot ignore the anti-immigrant sentiments that maybe are focused on what's happening at the border, but certainly impact what's happening here at home when you think about how we serve and really meet the moral imperative of serving immigrant students in our community. And so that's sort of where we find ourselves now. We've had an in-state tuition bill introduced year after year, every session of the General Assembly. That baton was passed to me in 2021, where I had the honor of being the primary sponsor for the in-state tuition bill in 2021 and 2022. Unfortunately, I was not there this year, but an in-state bill was actually introduced, and I want to get to that in a little bit, because this is the first time in about 7 years that we saw a Republican not just sponsor it, but actually lead the efforts to try to get some sort of in-state tuition provision passed in North Carolina. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. So where does, beyond history, where does North Carolina find itself right now? When you think about the context for in-state tuition, is this something common? Is it not common? You heard Gary allude to it. Over 20 states currently have in-state tuition across the nation, 24 to be exact, with Massachusetts joining them just a few months ago. And I think it's indicative to sort of see the battles that Massachusetts fought to get this passed, because it shows you where we are in this moment, where even a bluer progressive state like Massachusetts still struggled to get something like in-state tuition passed, and only passed it in 2023, when it's been available in other states for many, many years now. There's differences in how states have done it, right? I think there's a conversation around allowing DACA recipients, and I imagine most of you know what DACA is. If you want to raise your hand, if folks are familiar with the DACA program, right? Folks pass in-state laws that benefit DACA recipients, but there's other states who have been much more expansive and broad in how they define an immigrant student, right? And that is actually where we are in this moment. I think a lot of the focus still continues to be on DACA because that is what we know. It is a phrase that we use all the time, but we often use it interchangeably with all immigrant students. But the reality is that DACA is on its deathbed. As we've seen what's happened in the Supreme Court has effectively nullified that program, and so no new students can join that program. However, the folks that already had the program, at least for now, still maintain that status of having a work authorization and a social security number, right? Which gives them access to driver's licenses and other privileges in the community. And so when you think about this moment and what North Carolina and the nation, quite frankly, needs, right? Any in-state tuition law that is passed, you know, if we're being optimistic, would have to include the thousands of students who are no longer eligible for DACA if you want to have any sort of impact at all. We still refer to DACA recipients as, you know, kids and students and all this. Like, DACA recipients are in their 30s now, you know, and they are raising families. They have mortgages that they cannot escape. They are, you know, much further along on their lives, and we sort of think about them, imagine it in our heads. And so as we think about this new chapter of the fight for immigration, especially tuition fairness, we're thinking about, well, what does it actually look like to understand who would benefit and what type of policy we need around that. And so I'll close with the final sort of understanding of where we are right now. When we think about SB 683, and so that is the law that I referred to that had a Republican sponsor leading that in the state Senate this year. But the challenge with that legislation is that it says all the right things on paper, but alluding to the point I just made, it would only benefit DACA recipients or someone who has a social security number or a driver's license in North Carolina. In my rough back of the envelope calculations, that would benefit approximately 0 students in North Carolina, because there are no students who are immediately graduating from high school right now, eligible for DACA, and applying to college. So that's who this bill would be. So many advocates and activists are fighting for this, rightfully so, because it shows progress. There's good symbolism behind it, there's bipartisanship behind it, but at the same time we know that the impact of the legislation would be very limited because very few, if any, students would actually benefit from it. And so the road is long ahead of us on this issue, but I'm optimistic, especially seeing the faces in this room, that we will never stop fighting for something that we know is a moral and economic imperative and something that would really benefit everyone in North Carolina. So thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you. Everyone calls him Ricky, so I'm not being overly familiar with him. All right. Yubi Sandoval is a native of Cuernavaca, Mexico. Her family moved here in 1990. She was undocumented for 22 years, I believe. She became a DACA recipient in 2012. In 2018, she became a U.S. citizen through her husband, who's a naturalized citizen who many of you know. Yubi received her Associate in Arts degree in 2013 from Randolph Community College, then transferred to UNCG, where she got her BA in Psychology and Spanish. She went on to become the Assistant Director in the Office of Alumni Engagement there, and I only found out recently that she's now back in the classroom pursuing a Master's in Counseling. She's actively involved in many Latino, Hispanic, and broader activities in the community. Yubi Sandoval.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you all for allowing me to be part of this panel and discuss this issue that is near and dear to my heart. As Gary mentioned, I was directly impacted by in-state tuition. Growing up, I had to find ways to be able to afford college. I got through it, but that's not the same thing that many of my peers and even siblings and family members are living to this day. So I have a little reflection, and I'm going to steal this analogy from one of my professors who I am learning from as I complete my master's degree. I want you all to close your eyes, please. And I want you to imagine yourself being in front of a wild lion what would you do? Hopefully you are running. Hopefully you are running. Now think about running for your life and being in this survival mode for more than 5, 10, 20, even 30 years. What kind of effects do you think this will have on you? Psychologically, physically, anxiety, depression, trauma, fear, other chronic mental health illnesses, high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, and other chronic health issues. There is a correlation here, folks, and you can open your eyes. A direct correlation between your physiological state of being and your mental health, and how they come together impacts us every day. Imagine being chased by a lion constantly throughout your life, because that's exactly what we are. Minority populations in this country are going through every single day. And it's not just the current state of, it's generational cycles that get passed down to us by our mothers, because when we are in the womb, when we are becoming a full woman and we have a baby inside of us, we are carrying 3 generations inside. And that is a cycle that is repeating. And if we are not breaking it and helping these individuals break it, it wears us down. Now, their trauma has, I will talk specifically for our Latinx population, the trauma has followed us historically from the moment our parents or even themselves came to this country. The legacy of conquest and racism in our own countries, and then the colorism, oppression in their native countries, impact of poverty and discrimination in our own countries and now here. And then on top of that, when we arrive here, is the acculturative stress, which involves learning a new language, balancing different cultural values, the English, the American values, along with your own values that you were brought up, and managing between living in a majority and being the minority ethnic racial group. The impact that this is having on our male population is huge. So Hispanic males are at a higher rate than women to commit suicide, because they're not, and we're talking about just the general Hispanic population. Well, I'm not even talking about the DACA recipients. And they are still going through this constant trauma of, am I going to get my card renewed? Am I going to be able to sustain my family? As Ricky mentioned, they are in their 30s. I am 37 now. If I didn't marry my husband, I would still be a DACA recipient, and I would still be living in this situation, in this cycle. So I have a house and a job, sure, but I would still be thinking every day, will next year be the year that DACA ends? Men are not talking about their issues as women usually are more expressive. So these young men and older men that now have families are carrying this mental load of trying to be the breadwinners and being able to sustain their home. It's a lot of pressure. In 2017, suicide was the second leading cause of death for Hispanic ages 15 to 34. Again, we're talking about the general Hispanic population, not just the DACA recipients. So I want to say that this is a bigger issue for this population because they are constantly living in that trauma, constantly reliving things that the administration at a federal level keeps doing. And then you are in a home, in a state that you feel like, okay, we're in the democratic, phase now. I can breathe a little bit. I can breathe a little bit because I am not at risk. But they still have that in the back of their mind. Am I going to get pulled over? Be racially profiled? My parents, because they're still undocumented. My brothers, my sister. And I still have to look out for my family, and or if they are going to college and trying to sustain their families, because some of them are getting assistance, but sometimes even that assistance, they're sending it back home. And sometimes they're not they're barely surviving in college because they're having to send part of their tuition back to their house to sustain their families. So yes, there is help for some of these students and some of these DACA recipients, but it is very slim. And also, this is not just a Latinx issue. There are about, just to give you a little bit of context, 5,000 South Asian immigrants with DACA at this point in time. During 2017 when I read this article, but all that to say that it is not just a Latino issue. It affects other immigrant communities as well. Just as smart, just as talented. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to end this on a heavy note with me, but they are resilient. We are very resilient people. Immigrants tend to persevere in the absence of just any type of hope. We persevere, don't get me wrong. But at what cost? At what cost are we persevering? And is that really necessary? And can we take that burden off a little bit for them to breathe? Thank you.
Thank you, Yubi. Maria Cortez Perez was born in Veracruz, Mexico. She moved to High Point when she was 2 years old. She graduated from Wake Forest with a major in sociology. She currently works at the World Relief Triad Agency, helping Latino and non-documented students to achieve their education and career goals. She is soon to be accredited by the U.S. Department of Justice to represent immigrants in the immigration process, and she has plans to go to law school. Maria Cortez.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for having me today. I'll be doing the call to action. If you actually look at your table, there's going to be some short little handouts that say call to action. We're going to be highlighting SB 683. And then there's another handout that kind of highlighted some of the points that you just talked about. It's a graphic, and it has some of the issues that affect mental health, and on the other side, I think it's on the right hand, some recommendations for how to just provide solutions to help Latino students in mental health. But, so once again, my name is Maria Cortez, and I was one of the few students that got a full ride scholarship to Wake Forest University back in 2016. I graduated from high school in 2014, and I got involved in the community doing advocacy. Never really knew when I was going to go off to college. I just knew that I wanted to go. And thankfully, through those avenues, I was granted the Golden Door Scholarship, which is one of the few scholarships out there nationally that help Latino students, specifically undocumented and documented students, to go off to college on the full ride. I mention this because I was only one out of thousands who don't get this opportunity. I just met 2 young adults here today that are also undocumented who have dreams and aspirations and are very inspiring to me, but they're still struggling. And they'll share more about their stories in a few moments. But I am no more deserving than they are. And like Yubi said, this issue doesn't just affect Latino students, it affects students from different walks of life and different ethnicities. Currently, I am trying to get into law school. I graduated from Wake Forest University in 2020, and I've already had some conversations with some law schools here in North Carolina, like North Carolina Central University, School of Law. My hope is to stay in the state and get my law degree here in North Carolina. But because North Carolina still, to this day, hasn't passed in-state tuition for undocumented students, unfortunately, I don't qualify for the state grants, the state scholarships, and the state funding for me to attend North Carolina Central. And North Carolina Central is it's a state school. It's part of the UNC system. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to look for other law schools and other universities that will accept me in other states, like Texas or California, where I have family and will have support. I'm really frustrated because this is something, like Ricky said and like Yubi said, we've been coming here talking about this issue for over 20 years now. We're in 2023. There were students way before me, Ricky, and Yubi who were doing this activism and this advocacy work. And I'm 27 now, and I will soon be 30 as well. And there's a cap for DACA. As soon as you turn a certain age, you can no longer renew it. So I am here, standing in front of the League of Women Voters. I read about you guys in school, read about you guys in middle school, read about you guys in college. You all have the power to be able to make history again and help change policy for the betterment of all our communities. I am tired of having to come here and having to sit in front of people who say that they support me and they acknowledge me and they're with me. But when it comes to passing these laws that will help not just me, but the whole state of North Carolina, I don't see the support. So today, I call all of you to this call to action to please call your representative to push for SB 683. It's not perfect. It's not the most perfect policy. Like Ricky said, it does exclude those students who are fully undocumented who didn't qualify for DACA. But it's a step in the right direction. It's a step in the right direction to instill more hope, to motivate our students, to let them know that they aren't forgotten. Because that's how I feel. I feel forgotten. So once again, on the table, the call to action is there, and there's a little blurb that you can say, leave a voicemail, or you can send the email to your representative. All you have to do is go on Google, type in, who is my district representative here in my city of Greensboro, and it'll pop up, and just make sure you contact them. Briefly, I just want to highlight one more thing. I've been volunteering at Thomasville Senior High School, and I was able to establish an after-school program to educate, equip, and empower Latino students to to access a higher education and to inform them about their for other options post-graduation and professional careers. And there are 2 students that I'm currently working with who are seniors. One of them has a 4.9 GPA and wants to go to Johnson & Wales in Charlotte to become a chef and start their own restaurant one day. There's another student who has a huge interest in IT, but they also want to go to Johnson & Wales and do culinary arts so that they can help their family open a restaurant one day to sustain them. I mentioned their stories because, once again, these students weren't able to be here today, but their stories matter, and really happy to be here with you all and to be able to share their stories with you and mine. And thank you so much. Make sure you contact the representative.
Thank you, Maria. All right, we have 3 students here who are living the topic we're talking about. Obviously, all 3 of the previous speakers have as well, but I don't know. I didn't talk to them about which order. So, Melissa, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna have Melissa Espinoza Flores is a student at UNCG.
Hello everyone, like Gary mentioned, my name is Melissa Espinoza Flores. I am currently in my senior year at UNCG. I am majoring in Human Development and Family Studies with a minor in Sociology. I hope to go into graduate school, maybe Chapel Hill or UNCG, to get a master's in school counseling. The reason I want to go into school counseling was because that's where my struggle started, where I started to face a lot of challenges to go to college. I immigrated here with my parents when I was 3 years old from Mexico. We arrived here in the year of 2003. I've been here ever since. But I have DACA right now. I was able to qualify it before it got imposed or before there was no new applications. But since then, it has been able to allow me to have a job, have a driver's license, and like I mentioned earlier, go to school. I did 2 years at community college, specifically Forsyth Tech. I was able to get in-state tuition there through a sponsorship with my job. That was the only way that I qualified for in-state tuition. After that, I was hoping to go to UNCG to get my bachelor's. But I didn't know that it would be so expensive to go to a public university. But starting 2 years at community college just gave me a foot into school and starting off and hopefully continue going to school. My mom, she's divorced. My dad, I believe like 10 years ago, so she's really only been the only support that I've ever had. So yeah, thankfully for my mom, she's the one that has been able to pay for my school. And she's been the one that's been supportive to me and for everything that I've done so far. So I'm hoping to be able to graduate this upcoming spring and be the first in my family to graduate. I was the first to graduate from high school, but the same reasons for me. A lot of my family members, a lot of my cousins, they didn't graduate from high school or didn't attempt to go to college because just how expensive it is. So far, my first semester at UNCG, my mom paid like $17,000. That was just my first semester at UNCG for out-of-state tuition. Hopefully she was able to get loans through the bank, through payments, and that's really been the only way that I've been able to attend UNCG. I'm hoping to go to grad school, like I said, Chapel Hill or UNCG. Probably, I'm not sure yet, but maybe if not, I'll probably take a gap year, work a little bit, and just give my mom some time. So hopefully she'll be able to support me the same way she has. But yeah, thank you guys for having me here. Thank you guys for supporting our community and for allowing us to be able to speak about our stories. But yeah, there's not much else to say other than thank you. Hopefully I'll be able to come back and hopefully share my story again, so thank you.
Melissa, and tell me if I'm wrong, but she had some of the benefits of got in-state tuition for a while, and then shows up for her senior year to find out she doesn't have it anymore. So our families had to, at the late stage, figure that out. All right, Annette Castillo Vilches, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is also a student at UNCG, and has a different but similar story.
Good afternoon. My name is Ana Jimena Castillo Vilches. I'm 19 years old and I'm from Morelos, Mexico. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous and shit. I would first like to start by saying thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here. It is a great honor. One of the biggest events that I have experienced has been leaving my country with my mother almost 6 years ago when I was 13. Abandoning everything one knows to start completely from scratch as an undocumented immigrant is an endeavor I do not wish upon anyone. Our first years were very difficult. The uncertainty of not knowing what fate will hold for us, the lack of opportunities for our people, and being far away from home affected us both monetarily and emotionally. It took my mother approximately a year to find a permanent job, a job that made her much stronger and independent. She currently works at a gas station Mondays to Sundays from 4 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. Despite the challenges and hardships that life has thrown her way, she has always persevered and never given up. Her strength and determination are a constant source of motivation for me to keep moving forward. My mother is the light of my eyes, a great warrior, and if it were not for her, I would not be here sharing this story with you. It is incredible to me how women in my mother's case are capable of managing a family without anyone's help. And for this and much more, I take my hat off to you. During my senior year of high school, I began to realize that the path to achieving my dreams will not be very easy. I used to see how excited my classmates were to be able to attend their dream schools. It filled me with happiness to be able to share with them the same experience. Little did I know that not everything was rosy. I was not aware that by being distinguishable, I will have to fight against all odds to have just a little of what they had. I attended a church of my desired school without giving so much importance to money because how different could it possibly be? While I was there, I began to investigate the charges I would have to pay. $32,587 per year if I want to be exact. It was simply impossible. I'm sorry. How is it that a single mother who feels herself working every day and a daughter with a job that is not very well paid can manage to pay such exorbitant amounts of money? Many times I came to question why being different would make me give up my dreams. Why couldn't I have the same opportunities if the only thing I desperately dreamed of was being able to continue my studies? Our stay in the country was not harming anyone, and yet I had to dry my mother's tears of impotence and pain. It was at that exact moment that I made the firm decision to not just be another name on the list, no matter how tough the journey will be. Even though I couldn't apply for the same scholarships or have the same financial aid, I wasn't going to let my status get in the way. I was determined to overcome all the obstacles and show the world que una mexicana no se raja a pesar de la distancia. I got to work and apply for all the scholarships that crossed my path. Life gave me the privilege and the opportunity to earn each and every one of them. And although I was not able to cover my entire tuition, I managed to reduce the monthly payment amount to $2,589. My mother and I continued to work extremely hard to cover these expenses. However, today I can proudly say that I'm a first-year biology major student at UNCG. And hopefully tomorrow, the first doctor in my family. To conclude, I would like to tell people who went through the same situation as me, that as my mother says, todo llega a su tiempo. And that fear is something normal, but that is not a reason to stop. I would like to leave new Hispanic generations with the moral that there is always light at the end of the road, even though it is a little hard to reach the destination. I want to firmly emphasize that they're not alone, and that it is always possible if there's passion and love. The simple act of speaking to you, as well as having had the chance to take another big step in life, makes me forget all the inconveniences I have been through. And reminds me that life is very beautiful. We just have to learn how to live it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annette. When I met with her at one point, she said, "I have a question. Is it okay if I cry?"
He said, Margaret Arbuckle's gonna be in the crowd.
Right. So she knew that, and she came anyway. And I told her the worst thing that could happen is you're going to have 20 grandmothers coming up to give you a hug. So thank you all. All right. Sahar Rahimi is a student at Guilford College, and she's going to tell you her journey. And by the way, I also told Annette to hurry up. My doctor just retired, so hurry up and be a doctor.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sahar Rahimi. I was born and raised in Afghanistan. My family and I fled Afghanistan during the emergency evacuation in 2021. After a long and challenging journey, I began working as an Afghan youth mentoring program coordinator. In that role, I have been helping students with many aspects of their education journey. Unfortunately, many of our students who arrive from Afghanistan, who arrive in North Carolina with humanitarian parolee status, when they filled out the residency determination, they categorized them as an out-of-state student. And they have been here for almost more than a year, paying taxes and having the necessary legal documents. But as a result of this role, their dreams of purchasing higher education to become doctors, teachers, and contributing to the society has been on hold. These young minds, students who have highly motivated to start their college journey, but with this tuition barrier, it is like a roadblock for them, for their path to achieve their education goals. The 2 years of disappointment have been very hard, and I cannot imagine how hard and challenging it must be for the people who have been here in North Carolina for their entire lives. And I hope that the students will receive the needs that they are supported to continue their education journey and achieve their goals. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my story, and I will do my best to help anyone who needs to attain to colleges and higher education to achieve their goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahar. And African Services Coalition is one of the agencies that works with our roundtable, and they've put her in a position of advising other students how to deal with these issues. So in addition to navigating her own path, she's helping other students to do the same. So thank you to all of our speakers, especially the ones who haven't done this as much as the others. Really appreciate you being with us. So we have some time because everyone has been succinct. So we have some time for questions and answers. If people have any questions.
Can I make a shameless plug?
Yes.
As Gary mentioned earlier, I am in a counseling program, and if you know of any of your immigrant communities that need support, mental health support, please, you are more than welcome to refer them to the back clinic at UNCG. We are a training facility, but that does not mean that we do not have supervisors that are very competent. In fact, we have many of them who are immigrants themselves, who are doctoral students, who are also supervised by other professionals, professors. And so if you have anyone or if you are in need of services, this is a really good place to go. It is very affordable. The prices are anywhere from $10 to $30, depending on the bracket of your socioeconomic bracket. But the number is 336-334-5112. Again, 336-334-5112. Thank you.
Well, each one of you gave a very interesting background, and I appreciate you taking the time to come here and do that. I'm very curious, what is the age for obtaining your citizenship?
Would you repeat the question?
That microphone doesn't appear to be working.
Well, you have to eat it.
Oh, I get
She asked about what's the age for citizenship. The United States law is that you're born here, you're a citizen. So if you're not born here, there are different rules for different people. Perhaps, I don't know, if you be a Ricky as a Fuller.
I think Maria said that she was.
There is no age limit to when you can get your citizenship. There are people, for example, who are citizens and maybe went to Mexico and had their children there, and then they come here because this is where their home is, and they can go ahead and apply for their children's citizenship. So there's not an age limit as far as I know. I don't know if maybe your question is there a pathway to citizenship for undocumented people? No, as undocumented individuals, there is no pathway to citizenship. Unfortunately, the government has not established a pathway. So that's why we need immigration reform, and that's why we're here today to talk about in-state tuition, because unfortunately we don't qualify for in-state tuition because we aren't residents. Well,
And while the microphone's moving, I'll say that birthright law is being challenged right now in Congress, so that is at risk also. That I say cherished law, that means if you're born here, you're an American citizen automatically.
Right, I'm an immigration attorney, so I raise my hand so I can give a little context. It's very, very difficult. Oh, sorry. It's very difficult to get status if you're out of status in the United States. There are 5 ways to legally immigrate. A lot of people do it through family, like you talked about. But if you're not in status, you don't have the right relatives, there's just not a way. When people talk about getting in line, for the vast majority of people who are out of status in the United States, there just isn't a line. We can do a program in the future talking about that.
Perhaps Ricky or Gary could answer this. What are some of the other states, particularly Republican-led states, who do have in-state tuition equity?
You want me to go first? I don't have the full list in front of me, but there is plenty of examples across the nation on Republican-led states who have understood this as an economic imperative for their community and have passed it. One shining missing opportunity that we had as North Carolina was when Margaret Spellings was the UNC system president and wanted to bring in-state tuition to North Carolina. Margaret Spellings was one of the chief champions in Texas that helped Texas pass in-state tuition. And she was just met with a very different set of obstacles here that did not advance some of those conversations. And so how it looks like is fairly similar to what it looks like between blue and red states, to be quite frank. It's really about the will to get to a position to do it. And so a lot of the provisions are whether the eligibility of like who the pool is of whether it's all immigrant students regardless of status or whether it's just DACA recipients, for example. And then there's like age cutoffs, for example, but those are details. At the end of the day, many of the states who have decided to push forward with it have made a decision to do so with the vast majority of immigrant students being eligible for it. I hope that helps answer your question.
And I would say Florida, the governor of Florida adamantly opposed in-state tuition, but his legislature understood the economic impacts and passed it anyway.
I think for me, it was more like a comment. I know at work we recently came across, and Ms. Emery, please correct me if I'm wrong, an article from Capital Institute that it was reflecting about the backlogs of immigration, application. And they say that they estimate over 1 million people will die while waiting to migrate legally to the U.S. So I wanted to point that out to kind of give you a perspective of, why, in addition to everything, why is it so difficult to become a U.S. citizen just to get some type of status or relief, and why for many DACA holders are terrified. I'm one of them, because if DACA gets canceled, there's just no other relief. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I see.
Are there any statistics that we can add to this letter or a phone call to the legislators? Like, I know that you can think about if a lot of these young people have already gone through our public schools, that a certain amount of money and effort and love and concern has already been invested into them. And now we have these fantastic resources in these people that we should take advantage of as a state. And I know I've heard the statistics before, like how much money we invested in time. Would that be a good thing to do?
Yes, and I'll just generally, the American Immigration Council is a great source of a lot of data on various aspects of this, and the American AILA, American Immigration Lawyers Association, that Anne Marie's a member of, but yes, so thank you. I think some of our speakers may be able to stay around for a while if people want to have one-on-one conversations, but otherwise I want to thank everybody for coming, and I'm especially grateful to our students who stepped out of their comfort zone to share with us, so thank you.